Mamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. It was not on? Okay. So thank you for that very generous introduction. Sometimes you introduce so much, then I get worried whether I can measure up to the highly raised expectations of everyone. So happy to be here. I was here several years ago. Unfortunately, I don't remember how many years ago exactly, but quite a long time back. And the impression that people in New England have is that, well, Texas is a big state, and you have some big cities, Houston, Dallas, and Austin, but then everywhere tends to believe, and well, you can tell me whether they are right or not, they believe that, well, Houston and Dallas may be big cities, but this city is more kind of enlightened compared to the other cities in Texas. Is that true? Anyway, the impression is that somehow this is a kind of an oasis in the state. I visited it a few times in Texas. I mean, Houston and Dallas. So anyway, but I just intend to say that many people there have good impressions about Austin. So the topic for this 3 days that will be the 4 basic practices. Recently I wrote a book with the same title. So the 4 basic practices in Sanskrit, the term for that is sadhana chatushtaya. And the reason behind why this topic is important is that those of us who see ourselves as spiritual seekers, and specifically as students of Vedanta, need to know what the foundations of the study are. Whenever we want to construct a building, we don't, of course, start with the dome, we start with the foundation. And how firm the building is, how strong it is, how long, how much it will endure, will depend on how good the foundation is. So, in spiritual life also, it is very important to have a firm foundation. Because sometimes when we read the lives of these great saints and mystics, and some of the texts also, of course, we read about Samadhi, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the visions of the divine. It's very inspiring. And of course, most sincere spiritual seekers aspire to have those high spiritual experiences. And in the beginning, everyone tends to be very optimistic about it. Just to meditate for a week or 10 days, and boom, boom, all the experiences start coming. And then we find sometimes now, kind of get a reality check that yes, doing our meditation, our prayer does bring some amount of calmness, some amount of peace of mind, some reduction in our stress and anxiety levels. But yet, God realization seems way, way far away. And so sometimes this question can come. How long do I have to continue doing my daily sadhana, daily spiritual practices in order to get these high experiences that are described in books? And one reason, a major reason, an important reason why sometimes it may seem out of reach is because we may not have given enough attention to the very foundation of spiritual life. How quickly we will get these deeper experiences in spiritual life will depend on how much we have worked on these foundations. And the foundation, all the ancient Vedanta texts declare, are these four basic practices. Sadhana, Chatushtaya. Chatushtaya means four, a group of four. Sadhana is spiritual practice. So there are four. So traditionally, the first in the chronology with which they are often enumerated, the first of these four practices is Viveka, or discernment. The second is called Vairagya, or non-attachment. The third is actually a set of six practices they call sadhana, shat sampatti, and so which I have translated as six treasures. And then the last one is intense longing to reach that goal. So depending on how much we have paid attention to these four basic practices, our success and how quickly we will attain that success will depend on how much attention we have paid to these four practices. And so, since we are meeting on 3 days, today, tomorrow, and Sunday, so the best way to divide four practices in 3 days would be to have two practices on one day, the third on the second day, and the fourth on the last day. So that's the general plan. So today we'll take a brief look at the first two of these foundational practices. Tomorrow we will take a look at the third of these, and on Sunday we'll take a look at the fourth and the last one. Now, while we're taking a look, we're discussing ideas, perhaps clarifying some of the concepts attached to those ideas. But ultimately, the purpose of all this, not just what I'm saying to you, but you have the many visiting Swamis and Matajis coming and sharing their wisdom with you. The idea behind all of this is not simply to be informed of these concepts and principles, not something for intellectual stimulation, although these are very intellectually satisfying concepts. But eventually, what we want is that these practices transform our life. Because it is possible that everything can be intellectually very clear, we can appreciate these ideas, and yet it may not touch our daily life at all. While we might be able to discuss these matters eloquently with our friends, we might find that as a person, we probably may not have changed, but which is not really good. Because spiritual life is primarily about personal transformation. By transformation, at the very basic level, I mean, we need to be able to look at our lives and ask ourselves a simple question really. Am I today a better person than who I was 2 years ago or 5 years ago? It's very common in life for people to compare themselves with other people. Or compare with, whether it's in a workplace or in a place of worship, or we are always comparing people with ourselves, which is not a very healthy practice. But a healthy practice is comparing ourselves with ourselves. I as I am now and as I was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And then asking myself, in what way I have changed? And if I find oh, this needs enormous effort. Oh, it is so pretty. So when we compare ourselves with our past self, sometimes it may not be a very clear picture, in the sense that we might find that in certain respects, In certain aspects, today we are more mature, better, stronger than what we were before. And maybe in some respects we were better then, and some areas of our life we might have ignored. But this kind of an self appraisal is very important, because then it becomes easier for us to take decisions going forward. What should I do? How should I think? Because when I do this, I know how much, which areas of my life I need to pay special attention to, which areas of my life I can be happy that yes, I'm making some progress. So, for all of these reasons, it is helpful to, to look at these foundational practices. Now, having said that, so let's look at these first two of these, discernment, viveka, and detachment, vairagya. One way of understanding the practice of viveka is simply looking deeply. Sometimes we have many interests in life. There are so many things to attend to, so many duties, so many responsibilities. And everyone keeps saying life has become very fast and we have so little time, spare time. And what that unfortunately does is it has a tendency to make us superficial because we don't have enough time. We just kind of barely look at the news, maybe just read the headlines and say, hey, hello, how are you? Bye bye, got to rush. So, whether it's our interpersonal relationships, whether it is the reading that we do, whether the thinking that we do, lack of time makes it all very superficial. And if our life itself becomes superficial, then we may not always make the right decisions. All of the pain and sorrow and suffering that we experience in life, oftentimes, I mean, of course, there is a tendency to just blame because of this person, because of that person. I'm this poor little suffering because of these people. But we, at some point, we have got to take responsibilities ourselves. Sure, there might have been external factors responsible for some of my pain and suffering, but I have contributed to that in some way as well by the choices I made in life, by the decisions I took in life. And every time we take a decision, we make a choice, we do it with the hope that, of course, it's going to make me happy. It's going to be something good for me. But in retrospect, some of the decisions, some of the choices don't turn out to be good. What I thought will bring me joy really ends up bringing me more pain and suffering. Now, why would I make a choice like that? And oftentimes that's because I haven't looked deeply enough. So the practice of Viveka is really the practice of looking deeply, looking carefully. If we are able to do that, it becomes easy then to distinguish between what is good, what is bad, what is healthy, what is not healthy. All of these things are important in life because only when I'm able to distinguish between what is positive and what is negative, then I'll be able to choose between the two. What is good and now, good and bad are very relative terms. How do we define what is good? How do we define what is bad? And every one of us might have our own ways of defining it. But from a spiritual standpoint, a bhakta or a devotee or a sadhaka will say that anything that takes me closer to God, anything that takes me closer to my spiritual ideal, that is good. Anything that makes me forget God, anything that takes me away from that ideal, that is not good. Or anything, Swami Vivekananda used to say that strength is life, weakness is death. By that is meant that anything. So this is another one important, helpful way to know what is good or what is bad. That if there is anything in life that will make me strong, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that's good. I should say yes to it. Anything that will make me weaker, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and so on, in any of these different ways, I should say no to it. So at least we have some parameters by which to judge when we have to make a decision in life, when we have to make choices in life. We have something to know which will be a good choice, which will be a bad choice. And that is the practice of Viveka, looking deeply. And now, when we begin looking deeply, we notice things we may not have noticed before. And in science, sometimes that looking deeply can take the form of using an instrument, for instance. For instance, with our human eyes are wonderful instruments, and we can see a lot. But the eyes are still very limited. There's not eyes don't see everything. There is only certain frequencies that the human eye is capable of seeing. But of course, if you have a powerful microscope or a powerful telescope, with the help of that instrument, then we can see a lot more than what simply the eye can see. Exactly in the same way, if I'm just looking at life, looking at my own life, looking at the life around me, and I start looking it deeply, then I will notice things within me, notice things outside me that I may not have noticed before. Now, when we begin to see things we had not seen before, we also start asking questions, the kind of questions we may not have asked before. And one of the things we will notice if we look deeply at the life around us is that everything is perishable, nothing lasts. Now, of course, if you get strawberries, then they won't last too long unless you kind of keep them in a refrigerator or something. So different things in life have different shelf life. But if we see everything in life, looking deeply, we will see everything in life has a beginning and has an end. If we notice that nothing remains, then the question that we begin asking is, if everything ends, what's the point of all of this? Is there anything in life that doesn't end? Is there anything in life that is not constantly changing? But this kind of questioning, this kind of thing will occur only when we begin to look deeply. If we begin to look deeply, if we have Viveka, we will also begin to ask the kind of question maybe many of us never asked before about what is the meaning of reality? What is real? Because clearly, of course, we might say, well, this chair is real. If it were not real, I wouldn't be able to sit on it. I'm able to feel it, I'm able to touch it. And but then if with Viveka, with discernment, we might begin to question that. That just because I'm able to touch something or see something or hear something, is that enough to consider that object or that thing real? Because last night when I slept, in my sleep also I saw a chair, and that also I could touch in my dream. I could hear things. I could everything that I'm able to do now, I was able to do in my dream last night. And yet, none of us thinks that dreams are real. We think, oh, that dreams are not real. This world is real, but dreams are not real. Then we might say, why is, again, through discernment, we'll ask the kind of question we may not have asked before. Why is this world that we are experiencing now real? And why is it that the dream I saw last night is not real? And the only reason we can give is that, well, the dream world did not exist before I went to sleep. The dream world doesn't exist after I woke up in the morning. It existed only during that short time that I was sleeping. And so therefore it's not real because it was not there. It was not there before I slept. It was not there after I woke up. Therefore it's not real. There is actually a very ancient Sanskrit verse which goes this way. It comes in the Mandukya Karika. It goes like this. Adau ante cha yan nasti madhyakalepi tat tatha which simply means that which is not there in the beginning and not there in the end is probably not there in the middle also. When a magician shows, oh, there is nothing in my hand, and then does some abracadabra, some magic, and says, "Ooh, here is a flower in my hand." And then again he closes, and again it vanishes. And then you wonder, the flower that I saw in a magician's hand, is it real or not real? Because it wasn't there in the beginning, and later on it disappeared again. Now, with discernment, we will begin to ask, if dreams are not real, because they did not exist before I slept and after I woke up, this world too, this world didn't exist when I went to sleep. I mean, what is sleep? That this whole world, everything that we are so much attached to, everything that we so much cling to, it just boom, it just disappears. That's what sleep is. I forget who I am, I forget where I am, this everything disappears. And what is waking up? Waking up is suddenly this whole thing appears. So this, just like a dream doesn't exist before I slept and after I woke up, this world doesn't exist after I sleep and before I woke up. So discernment will make me question and make me ask the meaning of reality. All of these things will occur when discernment is there. And that is the first thing, awakening ourselves to spiritual life is happens when we begin to ask the kind of questions we never asked before. So there are these two things. There is one thing is a kind of a static piety. By static piety, I mean most people are pious, those who are religious. And for most people, religion becomes some like, of course, being good, being honest, um, now and then visiting a temple, visiting a place of worship, occasionally celebrating these different festivals. Um, what else? That shows I'm a very religious person, and it's good. But being religious, so there is a difference between that kind of piety and being spiritual. By spirituality means it's not enough to be simply just being a good person. It's not enough to be just periodically visiting a place of worship. It's not enough to be just celebrating some festivals, doing some puja, a little bit of arati, a little bit of incense. All of it is good, but not enough. So, awakening to spiritual life will occur when we begin to ask some basic questions about life. And all of this happened because of Vivek. We might, how many of us, for instance, have questioned? And there is one question that often comes up is what happens after death? Because not when we are very young, we don't think about death, but as we grow older, uh, although we don't want to think about it, death is not a pleasant subject. But eventually, sometime or the other, a person thinks, what will happen to me after death? Then, of course, the popular idea is that you're going to go to some place. If it's a nice and good five-star place, we call it heaven. If it's some very painful place, we call it hell. So we're going to go to heaven or hell. But through discernment, we begin to ask, what is this heaven? Where is this place? What is hell? Which galaxy is it in? Is it a place like the physical space that we think about? Or what is the meaning of heaven? What is the meaning of hell? So while sometimes we might occasionally think about what might happen to us after death, but discernment can also make us question, when did my existence begin? Because normally we just think, well, I was born on this day. So did my existence begin from the time I was born? Was I existing before I was born? What is birth? If birth is just this physical body coming into existence, am I simply this body, or is there anything more in me? And one thing clearly we understand, there is a lot within us which is no surgeon will find with the body is cut open. For instance, the mind, the hopes, the memories, emotions, these are not parts of our physical body, but they are a part of my personality. And so there is this visible part of me, the body. There is this invisible aspect behind me that we can call it man, buddhi, chitta, ahankar, the mind, body, and all of that, those things. The question is there anything more besides this? Now, all of this Viveka will help me find. And what the Gita, the Upanishads, and these ancient texts point out is beyond the body, beyond the mind, is a deeper reality. And they simply call it the Atman, the self, the real me. So just as we have these clothes covering us, the these shastras, the scriptures say that the body is also a covering. The mind is also a covering. Inside the body, inside the mind is a deeper truth, and I am that truth. So it is viveka, discernment, that will help me look deeply at the meaning of life and the meaning of reality and make me choose between these two. So once I have been able to separate out good and from bad, what is healthy from unhealthy, positive from negative, the next step is the second practice of Vairagya. Vairagya, literally, raga in Sanskrit means attachment. So Vigata raga, V is the prefix, viraga, and the noun form is Vairagya. So Vigata means that which has left, attachment which has gone. The Sometimes the word Vairagya gets translated as detachment, which is probably not very literal translation. Detachment also is problematic in some ways because when we use the word detachment in English, it just seems as cutting ourselves off from other people. It's like indifference. You have to detach from things. A better way is non-attachment, that we have a tendency to attach to everything that we see. And it could be a positive attachment, negative attachment. By that I mean simply this. Normally we think attachment simply means you like something, you love something, and you get attached to it. But now, if you hate something intensely, you are attached to that thing through your hatred. Your hatred connects you to that thing. And so attachment can mean not simply love, it can also mean hatred. Now, once through Viveka, we have been able to distinguish between what is good from bad, healthy from unhealthy. We need Vairagya then to say, which of these two should I choose? Now, in spiritual life, if we want to experience joy, freedom, perfection in our life, then we must obviously choose what is good, choose what is healthy, choose what is positive. If we are able to make that right kind of choice, then spiritual life becomes easier. It's not simply about how much meditation we do, or how much japa you do, or how much lectures you listen to. All of these things are useful, but ultimately, what it matters is how much can I, well, let me put it this way. There is sometimes some of these, because nowadays everything is gone digital, so things are a little bit different. But there used to be some of these old journals. I think they are still around. This Time, Newsweek, and all these magazines. Most of the people read online now. But oftentimes they have these different sections. There is a section for politics, section for sports. Newspapers to have that. There is a section for sometime for culture matters, and sometime maybe a one page. Some of the magazines might have for religion. Now, that might be a convenient way to separate out material subject wise, whether it's in newspaper or magazines or websites. But that way of thinking is probably not very helpful in our personal lives because that thinking can seep into our lives as well. And therefore, we have, let's say, one day in a week set aside for religion, which is probably, in one sense, people can say, well, that's practical because other days we have other things to do. But at least one day in a week, I'm thinking of God, which is good in a way. But the question is, can religion be confined to just one day a week thing? Which really begins to go to even the root of the problem level. What is religion? It's not just doing something, just even prayer. I mean, clearly we can't sit 24 hours and do japa or meditation, however much one may dream of doing that. But even if we say meditate or pray a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the evening, which is good, but what happens to the rest of the day? Am I religious only when I'm listening to a religious talk, when I'm praying, when I'm meditating? Or if I'm a religious person, I'm religious no matter what I'm doing. So authenticity in life would mean that we don't divide our life. And almost all of us, our lives does get divided into sometimes with a simple division is secular and spiritual. We just say, oh, these are my secular responsibilities and this is the religious part of my life. Which in the beginning probably happens to all. But eventually, what we want is, see, we cannot switch off and on. It's not like this is my secular self, now I've switched on. Now when I go to a temple, I switch on my religious self. It doesn't work that way. Authenticity would be that I am the same person where I am. In some sense, people who are extremely worldly and materialistic, they are sometimes more authentic than spiritual people. And that is because a worldly person is a worldly everywhere. Even if a worldly person goes to a temple, and even if that person prays, that person will pray for worldly things and do it in a very worldly way. So they are uniformly worldly everywhere. Now, as religious and spiritual people, we have to ask, am I uniformly religious and spiritual everywhere? Or is only when I go to a temple I suddenly feel very holy and very sacred? And then when I go out and I go to the mall or when I'm doing other things in life, I don't even remember I have anything to do with spiritual life. It's a very switch on and switch off kind of a thing. That somehow has to go. That if I think of that's what it does is we have to see what our primary identity in life is. And now we simultaneously juggle a lot of identities in life. Then we are able to move easily from one identity to another, almost effortlessly. We don't even realize it sometimes. In a family, for instance, well, clearly there is the parent, there are the children, maybe the parents. Sometimes you have all different generations and different relationships. You come together, and so when you are speaking with your son or daughter, your identity as a parent, as a father or mother, uh, becomes prominent. Like I'm speaking with my child, and what you say and how you say it is informed by your identity as a parent. But then when you are then maybe speaking with your father or mother, then your identity as a son or a daughter comes. Then you speak very differently with your parents than what you would do with your children. Because we are navigating these different identities we have in life. And then when you go to your workplace, you have a different identity. When you speak with your colleagues and other teammates and people who are working together at office, spaces, we different identity comes up. If you go to watch a ball game or if you're a sports enthusiast, and then you go to some sports event, then our identity as a fan of a particular team comes up. So, and we move freely from one identity to another. But some of these identities will change from the place to place, as when you're at home, when you're at a workplace, and so on. Some of these identities will, some of them are there for mostly for most people through life. Our gender identity kind of remains. If you're born a male or a female or any number of different combinations, generally it remains. Then our identity as a child or as a teenager, again, they remain for a few years. So when you're a little, is that I'm a little boy or a little girl, then you become a teenager. So when your identity as a teenager happens, what happened to that little boy was there? So that identity is finished. Now you have a different identity. But yet I'm still the same person. So something in me, even when I'm going through these different identities in life, something in me has remained unchanged because I'm still the same person. So what is that identity which has remained unchanged? Now, in theistic way of thinking about that is having a definitive relationship with the divine. Because generally, devotees or bhaktas, sometimes this might happen naturally. It's not something that we have to intellectually choose over what kind of a relationship I want to have with God. It's not like a multiple choice question. It's something that just happens naturally. Popularly, of course, we know that in many different religious traditions, think about God the Father, God the Mother. And if we are accustomed to thinking about God as our own father or mother, it can get even more personal because God is a very abstract term. So, for instance, since devotees of Ramakrishna or Sharada Devi might say, I'm a child of Holy Mother. There are different ways we can think about these things. But how, if I, let's say, just to take one example, so Holy Mother, Sharda Devi, if you say, well, she is the Divine Mother, and I like to think of myself as a child of Mother, which is great. The next question I can ask is, how often does that thought remain in my mind? Maybe when I'm standing before the altar and praying to Mother, I say, oh Mother, I'm your child, you're my mother. But then when I walk out, when I go everywhere, does that thought that I'm a child of God, I'm a child of Mother, stick with me? When I'm going to the mall and when I'm doing shopping, do I remember that it's a child of God who is now shopping? So we need to have a dominant identity. We can consider ourselves as really spiritual if we have a dominant spiritual identity. In the midst of, yes, we'll have these hundreds of other identities that we have in life, but this one is deeper. This is not as superficial, something that is changing all the time. And all of these ideas come to us if we think in terms of discernment and detachment. Then we need to be attach ourselves fully to this spiritual identity and respect all other identities that we have. They have a role to play, they are important, but they'll keep on changing. But our relationship with God will never change. Attachment, but there is one other thing that is helpful to remember, that one thing that we often mistake and get confused about is attachment and love. That being attached to someone and to love someone, is that one and the same thing? Through discernment, through viveka, we see that actually no, they are very different. The characteristic of attachment is, first of all, Attachment is a person who is attached wants to make everyone their possessions. So if I'm attached to my family, this is my family. These are my children. This is my interest, this is my hobby. So all things we are attached to is primarily about myself. They are mine. So we want to own them. Now the nature of love is very different. Nature is not about myself. Love is about the person I love. It's not me but you. So attachment and love are very different. In fact, they are opposite. Although we might sometimes think that, oh, if I love someone, I'm automatically attached to that person. Actually, no. And the second thing we see is that true love always leads to just joy and freedom. You feel liberated, you feel free, you feel happy. Now, attachment, yes, attachment does seem to bring some happiness now and then, but alongside of those things, attachment we know from our experience in our own lives, of the different people and things we are attached to, that sometimes attachment can bring pain, attachment can bring fear, attachment can sometimes lead to suspicion, anger. All of these things are possible. And therefore, attachment and love are very different. Now, in most relationships in life, we will see that there is there is clearly many relationships bring great joy to heart. But alongside joy, there are occasions in life when these relationships they also bring sometimes anger, sometimes stress, fear, all kinds of negative emotions also come. And therefore, it's possible to think about most of our relationships as a mixture of love and attachment. So every true happiness we experience in a relationship, that happiness comes through real love that is there, no doubt about it. But everything else that we experience in a relationship, that comes because of attachment. In other words, the more I'm able to remove attachment from my life, the more only love will remain. And if love will remain, then that can bring only joy. That will bring more freedom. Freedom to myself, freedom to the people I love. Otherwise, sometimes when we have this sense of ownership, people feel suffocated. And sometimes parents have to be, sometimes learn it in a very painful way. Because sometimes when the children are very little, of course, these are my children, and so everyone feels very attached to them. But when, I don't know whether it's the experience of everyone, but several teenagers have come and shared that with me. Sometimes it can be very suffocating when the children grow up a little bit, when they become teenagers and maybe a little bit older than that. And with the parents, it's like, you're mine, you. Then it's like, whoa, so everybody, it just becomes too much. It's very suffocating. And so sometimes through our own experience in life, we begin to understand, if we again have Viveka, the distinction between love and attachment. So these are the first of the two practices, Viveka and Vairagya. Now, how to deepen Viveka, how to deepen Vairagya will become easier when we look at this third, which is this Shat Sampatti, the six treasures, which we will take a look at tomorrow. But I think I've shared with you some enough background about these first two practices. But I think I just don't want it to be. I just go on talking and listening. So what I would like is whatever thoughts and comments and ideas you have, uh, if you can share that, and if you have any questions, of course. So let's spend some time doing that. And as far as possible, I would appreciate if you at least confine your question first to what we talked about, rather than just kind of going all over. Because spiritual life is like a big ocean. There's anything can be asked, but at least as much as possible, if you can confine your questions to this subject, we'll be able to have a more deeper and more focused conversation. Yes.
I have a question. So when we are doing sadhana chatushtay, and of course Shad Sampati, all of those, we tend to start becoming very serious with everybody around, and so how to get over that? Like, when we are trying to discern with every situation, or we are trying to do the non-attachment or vairagya, and of course Shat Sampati, we start, kind of analyzing every situation and start getting very serious with people around, and they tend to misunderstand you. So how do we get away from that?
No, there is no. I mean, yes. When we begin to take spiritual life seriously, uh, clearly there's something is going to change within us, and if something is going to change within us, people around are going to say, "Why are you doing thing? Why are you changing?" And if you believe that what you're doing is important for your life, just don't care. Because if you should have that faith that whatever change is occurring in you is a good change. If it's a bad change, of course, you have to be worried about it. But but it is possible. It's not necessary that everybody becomes serious like that. But yeah, so things will change. We cannot expect that I'm going to be some deep, big saint and mystic, but outwardly nothing is going to change. No, something will change. Maybe some people will like the change. Some people may not like the fact that you are getting too spiritual. You might lose some friends, but you will get new friends. On the other hand, if what other people think of me is so important to me, then do as much spirituality as is possible and be happy with that. I mean, what else can be done, right? So we have to see what we have to just decide our priorities in life. And I remember when I became a monk. Um, so one of the things, my uh, my family, my parents and others, they were the ones who brought me Swami Vivekananda's books when I was 9 or 10 years old. They were the ones who gave it to me, and so and I started reading it and I liked it, and then I became a monk. And so and so and then everyone actually told my mother who gave me these books when I was very young. And so when I actually finally became a monk and left, and everyone started blaming my mother, you gave him this Vivekananda books, you are responsible. And my mother told them, just like any mother, I wanted my son to be a good boy. I didn't want like he'll be so good. So that is what sometimes can happen. A certain amount of goodness, a certain amount of idealism, people are able to digest. If you go like too much beyond it, like don't get so spiritual right now. And generally, I don't know whether it's a very Indian thing or it's kind of something that's very universal. But there is a popular idea that religion, etc., is when you are retired. Because when you are young, there is so much other things to do. Why would you have to worry about God and all such things? So become successful, do what needs to be done, and then when you're retired, then how will you pass your time? You go to a temple, go do things. So that's one popular idea. But again, through viveka, through discernment, we see that It's never too late, but it's never too early either to start thinking about it. In fact, the sooner we start thinking about these higher truths, the better off we are. Because in some ways, if we believe in the idea of rebirth or reincarnation, then this is not our first birth. We have had many births in the past. And we have been born and we have died many times. So do we just want to keep on? How many of you have seen that movie, Groundhog's Day? How many? Oh, well, it's a very popular movie. Everyone's seen it. So in some sense, what Vedanta says is that this life is a little bit like that. I mean, just think about, now that we are all human beings here, um, so if there were animals or plants, maybe let's restrict our discussion only to human beings for the moment. And what is a human life? By and large, for most of us, we are born somewhere. We are taken care of by our elders, usually our parents. Then we go to school, because everyone goes to school. And then maybe some of us go to college, and then we graduate, and then we make some friends. We have some interests in life. There are some things we love, there are some things we hate. Then eventually we choose a career. Sometimes we get the career we aspire for. Sometimes we are forced to do something we don't particularly like. Then in the course of our professional life, we have a few successes, a few failures, some recognition, some blame, some all. It's a mixed bag. And then eventually, then we get married, we have children. Then eventually the children grow up. We get old, then we retire, and then eventually we end up in some nursing home or somewhere. The body becomes frail, and then one day we die. So birth, death, going through these stages of childhood, youth, middle age, old age, and the details might vary from person to person. But essentially, a few friends, a few enemies, some success, some failure, some disappointment, some joy, some sorrow. Put it all together, that's a human life. And then, of course, without any warning, without any intimation, one day, boom, just go, we just die. And then suddenly we born somewhere and go through the whole thing all over again. And then we die. And then again go through. At some point, we are saying, what's the point of all this? If just to think that you have to be born again, go to school and do all those assignments, if in spite of all that, if we don't develop enough non-attachment, I don't know what else will. And so, discernment helps us ask the question, is this all? Is this just the thing by life is going to go? Is there some way to get out of all this? And that's what moksha really means. That's what Vedanta says is the goal of life. And it's not forcing anybody to choose that goal. Just saying, if you're tired with the monotony of this so-called human existence, then there is a way to get out of it. And the way to get out of it is to be never be born. Now, the funny part is this. If you are told, oh, the goal of life is never to be born, it doesn't sound that attractive. Because like, if I'm not born, then where will I be? But if you are told you will never die again, then that sounds very wonderful. Of course, we don't want to die again. If then discernment will say, well, birth and death go together. If I don't die again, that means I won't be born again. So how you phrase it also makes a difference. So there is this great one person who was a great writer, and he wrote about, he's written a lot of travelogues. So he went to France once and spent a week in Paris and then wrote a book, 7 Days in Paris, photos and wonderful descriptions. And the book was published. He's a well-known author, 7 Days in Paris. And then, of course, the book bombed. Nobody bought it. Nobody seemed interested in it. And the publisher's like, oh, what do we now? We printed so many copies and no one is buying that book. Then they got a brilliant idea. So they got all those copies, just changed the cover and changed the title. From 7 Days in Paris, they changed the title to 7 Nights in Paris. And the book became a big success. Of course, you have spent 7 days there. You have obviously spent 7 nights there. So sometimes, even when describing what the goal of life should be, it depends on how you phrase it, how you treat it. So again, never being born again doesn't sound as great as never dying again. But the important thing is to look deeply and see and think about this way. People are afraid of monotony. People should say, oh, I'm just getting bored. But life is boring in some ways. As I said, everything is very repetitive. And that's why this constant thing, everybody wants a new game, a new something, this quest for something new. Because anything new becomes old pretty quickly. Every 1st of January, New Year, celebrate, etc. Then by next 2 days, maybe you have some euphoria of that New Year beginning. And then it's just like, oh, nothing much has changed. It's just same life. You're doing it all over again. So what's the point of a New Year? Birthday. And the birthday sounds like a great day. But again, next day you're back at work, and again you're like, oh wow, nothing much has changed. So monotony. We have to, one of the things in spiritual life becomes easier to lead a spiritual life is to make peace with monotony. By peace, I mean not try to defeat monotony in the external world. Because, oh, I want something new, I'm bored, you keep on saying. Then so much of our time and energy goes in finding something new that there is no time left to just look within and see what's going on here. On the other hand, if we just accept the idea, life is boring, life is monotonous, then I look within. And then we will discover great things in our things about our own selves we never knew. The tragedy of modern life is that we know a lot more about the world, a lot more about other people than we know about ourselves. We now, through science, with all these space travel and all of that, we want to know what's on the other side of the moon, what's happening in the distant galaxy. That's useful, it's interesting. But what's the point that I know so much about the universe and I have no idea what's going on in my own heart? And so, at some point, and I'm not suggesting that everyone in the world is going to do it, it's never going to happen. But at least a few brave souls who have seen the monotony of external existence will say, I'm now going to look within and find something new. You see, and of course now with phone and so many gadgets we have, it's kind of people have different ways of overcoming the boring nature of life. Now, if you just try doing this sometime, just switch off your phone, switch off your television, don't receive any phone calls, and just sit. Don't have any books, don't have anything. Just be by yourself for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and see how you feel. Most people will get bored if there is nothing to distract them. But actually, it has a very sad message for us. If I'm alone, and if there is nothing I can keep myself busy with, and if I'm bored, what does it say? What does it mean? Because when I'm by myself, the only company I have is my own, and I'm bored. I can't stand my own company. I'm a boring person. Now, if I can't stand my own company, how can I expect other people to enjoy my company? If I find my own company boring, why will not other people find it boring? And so one must learn to love being in one's own company. And in some respects, meditation and prayer are times when we are just by ourselves. And if we find meditation boring, that means I'm a boring person. So think about that next time you get bored.
Is non-attachment and renunciation, are they same?
Sure. Again, there are two different words, and sometimes we need not get caught up in words because people might use the same words and mean different things. But renunciation or detachment, or you call it by any name, if giving something up is not easy, if giving something up is difficult, then that's not really giving up. It's see, if I give something up and I feel a little bit, oh, now that thing is gone, that means I still value that thing. And so a real renunciation means if something becomes valueless, then renunciation is something that happens. It's not something that needs to be done. Because if you do something, then that means we still kind of have value for it. And so when things become useless, we just put them in a trash bin and don't even think about it a second time. Although really we have renounced it, but doesn't, because it's become valueless. But if something that I value, somebody forces me to renounce it, takes it away from me, then I'm upset. And so ideally, it's good to think about renunciation not in terms of something to be done, but something that happens. And that will happen through discernment. If I look deeply into something and say, oh, this is, sometimes it'll happen. Sometimes there'll be, um, and I've seen it happen in my case as well. Something is on my desk and I just keep it there thinking, oh, this will be useful. I will need it at some point. So I don't want to be searching for it somewhere. So I just keep it on the desk. And I find 2 months have passed and I haven't even looked at it. I haven't even touched it. And then I say, no, actually, it's not needed. There are so many, this is just one example, but there are so many things in our life which we think that, oh, this is important, I must keep it. And then we find either we never think about it, we never need it, or sometimes the things that we keep around us bring us more pain than joy. And we find it's so much easier to just let it go. But there is some kind of an illusion that no, this is a pleasure. And that's why Viveka is important. So ideally, renunciation should be a very natural process. That it should just, if I look deeply, that which is valueless will slip away from me. That's how I see renunciation.
So in terms of like reality and perception on reality, so sometimes I feel like it's almost like I'm going through things because of if I get really deep into meditation and then the next day or even sometimes for days on end, I feel kind of when I wake up that I'm sort of disassociated in a sense, like I'm almost like floating through life's activities, not very grounded, if that makes sense. But then there are these moments, say with work or family, where all of a sudden, like a circumstance will happen that will just, it's like, okay, I'm definitely here, right? How do you find the balance when you're, kind of shifting? And it's almost like, I don't even know how to describe it. It's almost like there's this filter of unrealness to daily life that's seems very ungrounded. Um, but then other moments you just feel intensely associated with what you're doing, say because of work or family or whatever. And so it's almost like there's a bit of kind of a roller coaster of existence in a way when there's just not balance. And I don't know quite how to reconcile those two things sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with you that there is oftentimes a kind of roller coaster because taking spiritual life seriously often involves looking upon ourselves, looking upon our place in life, the purpose of life, our connections in life in a very different way than we have done before. And therefore, it is going to seem a bit weird that when you're thinking in one way and then you kind of come back to this kind of the other part of our life. So it is a kind of a roller coaster at the beginning. Um, there is definitely there is going to be some change because we want that change. Because if nothing changes, because again, we have to say, what is the meaning of balance? Balance in the sense of my life with everything else will remain exactly as it is, and my spiritual life will keep on going closer to the divine. At some point, as I said, we are the same person. When I'm praying and meditating, the person who is praying and meditating and the person who is then interacting with the family are not two different people, it's the same person. And therefore, while in the beginning there will be some adjustments from both sides, eventually you will see that spiritual life, because it helps us look deeply, not only in our own life, but in our understanding our family better. So we'll be able to love them in a deeper way than we did before. We'll be able to understand them and care for them in a much better way than we did before. But this will not happen overnight. This takes time. And so generally it doesn't happen that radically. I mean, even it's not as if we start meditating and immediately everything changes for us. It does, it's a very slow process. So for most people, it's a very gradual transition from one way of thinking to a different way of thinking. In some cases, it might be a very radical change. Then there will be a little bit of this roller coaster experience. But in some sense, that's not completely avoidable. Sometimes will happen.
I guess what I mean is hard to reconcile sometimes your role and place in the world and having to, I almost want to say perform, right? Your role in this version of reality, I'll call it. But it's still at the same time just feels so unreal, and it's not real in a sense, and it's hard sometimes to reconcile, like you're having to go through that.
Yeah.
And everybody else is just going through life like it's normal, but you realize it's like impermanent.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
It's
I mean,
it's
I like.
hard to sometimes when you're thinking this, but everybody else is like not even on the same page.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I like that you use the word perform because, in some sense, yes, it is a kind of a performance in one way. If we begin to take spiritual life seriously, we have to be prepared for the experience that everyone is not going to be on the same page with me. That's just the reality. And I like the word perform because there's this Shakespeare's a very well-known passage often quoted about all the world's a stage and the different stages we go through. And we know, well, the, the Academy Awards were given not too long ago, and so people who do great as actors, their recognition, they are recognized as great actors and so on. So who would we say, is it on? Are you able to hear me? So who would we say is a good actor? A good actor will be one who are able to immerse themselves in the character that they are playing. So much so that they forget their true identity. Then everyone says, oh, this person is such a great actor. So natural. Although the role or the character that that person is performing, that performance, is very different from who that actor may be in their own personal life. But just like pouring themselves into that character. And of course, when one becomes such a great actor, they'll get more movies or more plays they get to act on, and they'll become more famous and keep on acting. But who is a bad actor? A bad actor is one who is not able to pour themselves into that character, who never forgets who they truly are. And because of that, their acting is not going to be very natural because what role they are playing is they are not kind of putting themselves fully into it. And so there are bad actors, they're going to go out of business pretty quickly. No one's going to give them more roles to perform. And they'll say, okay, bye-bye, we don't need you again. So if this analogy makes sense, that in some sense, Vedanta says that we all have to be bad actors. Will we get an award when we become bad actors? So what is our true identity? My true identity is I'm a child of God. My true identity is I'm the Atman. And now, most of us go through life. We have immersed ourselves in our identity as human beings. And human beings is through this human body, mind, we think, this is who I am. This is what my family is. This is what my goal is. This is what my career is. And these are what my interests are. So those are the character, that's the role we are playing. And we have fully embraced that. And that's why most of us, we are such good actors, we don't even remember most of the time that I am the Atma or I'm a child of God. But now, the more spiritual one gets, one is not able to forget it. All the time you think, I'm the Atma, I'm a child of God. And of course, you are not able to carry out your performance in the day-to-day world the way you did before. And that's why you don't get to come again and again. God says, bad actor. You don't need to. That's what freedom would be. So, yes, balancing everything may not always be possible. That change will occur. What I can say with definitive thing, that change will be for the better. That sometimes people around us it might take time for them to recognize. But if we are going on the right track, deepening of spiritual life increases our maturity, increases our understanding, increases the ability to love, to care. So when the people around us see that, oh, this person is now, it's so much, such a joy to be in the company of this person because I feel peaceful, I feel joyful. I'm able to feel that this person truly loves me. This person understands me. That's the gift of spirituality. So now it can vary from one situation to another. Sometimes it might happen quickly, sometimes it might take time. But eventually, the change that will occur in a spiritual person is definitely, of course, most blissful for the person themselves. But eventually, others around will feel that. And in some ways, you see, the idea of service, idea of helping others, we can understand if a person is hungry, you feed a hungry person as an act of service. If there is someone who lacks something, doesn't have something, and you give that person, we say that's good service. That kind of service is well recognized and most people accept. There's this other kind of service which is very subtle, which will not make headlines, which no one will know, which no one will praise you for. But that service is the service of just being a truly good person, someone who lives with certain values and principles, someone who lives honestly, truthfully, one who has a practice, a spiritual practice, whether it takes the form of prayer, japa, meditation, whichever path it takes, that it brings some depth to one's life. And you don't have to go on preaching to anyone. You just be yourself, be your best self. Unbeknownst to you and unbeknownst to the people around you, you are actually benefiting them. Sometimes people may not even know that some people just spend a few minutes with you and say, I feel so good. They may not even know that it's something emanating from you that has brought them that peace and joy. They may not know it, but you have already helped them without you even knowing it. You see, there was this British author. Of course, he later on emigrated and lived in New York, W.H. Auden. So he, in his biography, autobiography, in his diary, this was found. So he, at one stage in life, when he was fairly, I don't know what age he was in that time, but he was extremely depressed. He was so, for whatever reason, and he said, I'm just going to commit suicide. He said, life is not worth living. So he just goes to the Brooklyn Bridge, dead of night, it's like 1 a.m. in the morning, there's hardly anybody on the street, and he says he climbs up, he just wants to jump and finish his life. And at that time, one big, some 16-wheeler or 24-wheeler truck passed by that. And of course, the road was empty, and the big truck was going, and the driver who was driving it, he didn't even know, didn't even see over the Brooklyn Bridge, there is this one person standing by. But this driver was so happy, so joyfully, he was just singing loudly. And his truck passed by that road. And this author was about to jump and end his life. Suddenly, that joyful song he heard, and he said, no, what am I doing? Life is not just all about sadness or pain. There is joy in life. So he heard that song of that truck driver who just passed by, I mean, not even 1 second or 2 seconds passed by. And he says he quietly retraced his steps back to his apartment and never thought of giving up his life again. And then he writes that that truck driver will never even know that he had saved a life. What that truck driver did was simply, he was joyful. He just expressed his joy. But just being joyful ourselves unknowingly, we may be benefiting some people. So it's good to be cheerful. Swami Vivekananda once said, by being cheerful always, by being pleasant and cheerful always, one can be nearer to God, nearer than any prayer. And so just by being peaceful and joyful, all through, we do not know. Maybe you're walking on a street, somebody else is coming from the other side, and maybe that person has had a maybe didn't sleep well last night, or maybe there's some fight at home. That person is very depressed, and you don't even know who that person is. But maybe you just go peacefully. Maybe there's that eye contact. You just smile at that person, just a joyful, peaceful smile, and you walk by. But sometimes just seeing a peaceful, joyful person itself brings some joy in the heart. That's service, but it's not like generally a recognized form of service. So when we practice spiritual life, we should never think, "Oh, I'm just doing it for myself." It's never for ourselves. Yes, of course, we'll be benefited by it, but people around us will be benefited as well. Swami Brahmananda, a great disciple of Ramakrishna, he says that if there is one person in a family who prays regularly, who, who, who's sincerely spiritual, the whole family gets a benefit of that practice. So while many of these practices like prayer and meditation might seem very individualistic, it's like, oh, these people around, I'm just doing it for myself, what am I doing it for them? But that's not true. And so if we are too afraid of change that will occur as a result of spirituality, then one can practice spirituality as much as they are able to deal with it. And if it's change is getting too much, then we say, okay, I don't want to get too spiritual. But one thing that we know from the experience of all these great ones is that there is no need to hold back. Because the result is, if spirituality, true spirituality, is me going back to my true self, discovering my true home. What could be bad with that? What could be wrong with that? Why should I take only half measures? It's not as if we have infinite time. We don't even know how much time we have. So, in this limited time, why not make the best use of the energy and time that we have? Because, in some sense, we have to be grateful for the blessings in life. There are so many people in life who do not have the opportunities, the privilege to be even thinking about these things. We know already in so many parts of the world there are wars going on, there are bombs falling. Thousands of people have lost their homes. You think they have time to think on the Atman? And here we are sitting comfortably here. It's a privilege. We cannot take any of this for granted. We might have been, any of us could have been in such troubled parts of the world. And then we wouldn't be able to sit here and talk about discernment and non-attachment. So if we have this opportunity through God's grace, it has come, then we have to say, am I making a good use of the privilege and the opportunity that is in my life? I think that's important.
Shall we end up?
Yes, I think should be enough. It's, I think, enough for everybody else.
Maybe one last question. Only last question. Okay, then we end up, Maharaj. No,
Okay.
you have.
The last question only for today, not your last question in life.
Well, you kind of used word unreal for an illusion, like a magician's head, and also unreal equivalent to impermanent. Are they essentially same and true? What if, like Buddha says, there is no permanent reality? If all the things that we experience in life is just a five skandhas interacting with itself as an impermanent reality of an illusion. And if there is no underlying ground of reality, how will you respond from Vedanta point of view?
Well, the question is, who is experiencing that there is no underlying? So is that person also impermanent?
Well, Buddha will say that
No, don't tell what you are saying now. You tell me.
well, I would say that the consciousness of person is a generation of the skandhas, is not necessarily consciousness per se.
That's fine. All that I'm saying is, you say everything is permanent, right? How do we know everything is permanent? Because somebody is experiencing it. That somebody who is experiencing it, is that somebody permanent or not? Otherwise, what that experience itself has no value.
Well, I would argue from the scientific point of view is that the person is an illusory reality of five skandhas meeting in the mind.
I get that. All that I'm saying is, who experiences the illusion? Does anyone experience that illusion?
But when Vedanta says that I really don't even exist. I am itself products of illusion.
No. I'm not asking you what Vedanta says or Buddha says. You tell me, because you made that statement. Everything is an illusion. Does anybody experience that illusion?
Jiva is experiencing illusion. But
Who?
Jiva.
Okay, is Jiva real?
See, my problem is this. If I am unreal, Jiva is unreal, how can it experience unreality itself?
Who is anybody asking me the question right now?
If Jiva is asking the question.
But Jiva is unreal. Why should I even answer it?
Well, that is the dilemma of Vedanta itself.
No, it's not dilemma. The Vedanta says Jiva is real, not as Jiva. Jiva is Brahman.
Right.
So that's the logical fallacy in this idea of emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. I've read all that.
Sure.
But has anyone experienced emptiness? Because otherwise, how do we know there is emptiness? But if someone has experienced emptiness, then there is no emptiness because that somebody experiencing the emptiness was there. So that's called logical fallacy. And therefore, Vedanta doesn't accept that emptiness. That the experiencer always is, the subject always is. It questions the objective reality, never questions the subject. I can question the existence of anything apart from myself, but I can never, no one can say, I don't know whether I exist or not. That doesn't make sense.
And the second part of the question is impermanent equivalent to illusion?
Well, that's how human beings think. If something is real, it has to be there all the time. But why is dream not real? Why is dream an illusion? Because it just doesn't seem to exist all the time. Compared to the dream, this world seems to have persistence. That's why we say this world is real and the dream is not real. So we are already making that equation that which is real has to have persistence. That which is only there for a short time. So there is no such thing as a temporary reality. Thank you.
Next is, so this exciting section is over. So tomorrow you will get treasures, all right? 6 treasures.
Yeah, we'll get something and you decide whether you get it or not.
So please come tomorrow. Let me show you can take the treasures from here, from the shrine. And now is prasad distribution. And please come into the kitchen. There's a prasad waiting for you.